All right, 9:03. I think I'll go ahead with the introduction. So welcome to the Stanford Medical Mixed Reality Symposium, this time about behavioral XR. So quick background about the SMMR, the Stanford Medical Mixed Reality Symposium series. It's a series where we always feature different labs in Stanford that are working in the medical mixed reality space. This time, we'll put an emphasis on the virtual human interaction lab. So Walter Greenleaf is here to represent the virtual human interaction lab. And then we'll have great guests from the clinic, from industry, from startups, and working in a space and working on behavioral XR applications. In the beginning, we'll start with quick introductions by all the panelists, where they give some background about their current work. So we'll start with Walter. He's a neuroscientist and researcher at the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab. Also sits on the board of multiple behavioral XR or medical mixed reality companies in general. And Walter, if you can please go ahead and start with your introduction.
Well, thank you, Christoph. It's wonderful to be here and wonderful to reach out to the extended community of people, both at Stanford and also at large. And I'm also very excited to be here because a number of my dear, cherished colleagues are on the line to share some of their work. The work in behavioral medicine using VR and AR technology is just surging forward. Part of that is because it's giving us the tools to address some problems that have been difficult to address previously. And also we're in a position now to address some of the problems that are confronting our society at large, secondary to the pandemic, problems with anxiety, problems with depression. So it's a important time for our field. And I'm very excited to share with the group here a little bit of information about the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab, which I'm proud to be a member of. The lab does basic research on all aspects of how virtual environments can influence our behavior, and also the impacts of VR, AR technology on society at large. I hope you have a chance to go and check out our website, and I will show you just sort of very briefly list some of the interesting publications that is being recently have been put out by the lab. Let's see here. So the URL is vhil.stanford.edu, and I'm going to scroll through very quickly some of the publications. These are in order of most recent published. So we see one on virtual reality mirror therapy for cerebral palsy, using VR to help people understand the impact of sea level rising and and how communities can be involved. Systems on how VR can affect attitudes regarding climate change, social exhaustion and Zoom, verbal overload, effective water immersion, on vection and virtual reality. This one I find really interesting: personal identifiability of user tracking data during observation of 360-degree VR video. Some of the implications for as we roll out new technology, the applications on society. There's a very long list of research publications that have come out of the lab, and I hope you have a chance to take a look and see what we're up to there. But I don't want to take up any more time because I have some amazing colleagues who are going to give presentations now, and I'll turn you over, Christoph, to start that part of the process.
All right, thank you very much, Walter. So then we'll also introduce the panelists, or we give the panelists a chance to introduce themselves. And we'll start with Elizabeth McMahon. I hope I pronounced it correctly. And Elizabeth is a practicing physician, psychologist in the San Francisco Bay Area and working already for many years in the VR for therapy space. So Elizabeth, the space is yours.
Thank you, Christoph. I am a psychologist. I'm not a physician, just to clarify that. So I have been, I've got a deep background in anxiety. I spent over 30 years working at the Kaiser Psychiatry Clinic in Fremont, specializing in anxiety disorders. Worked on the Regional Best Practices Committee, were trained postdoctoral fellows for decades, ran the training program for a while. And when I saw an article in 2008 by Rizzo and Parsons that said exposure in Virtuo, exposure using VR, was as effective as the gold standard of in vivo exposure, it blew my mind. I thought, I gotta have this. I wasn't even sure I believed it. Did a literature review. And of course, there was much less research support then than there is now. Research support supported it. I looked for any therapist anywhere in the whole greater Northern California who had ever used VR and found two. I drove out from San Francisco to Fresno to talk with the one therapist who still had the equipment, and came back and wrote a grant proposal to get it for the clinic. So I've been using VR clinically since 2010. And I can tell you that it is an extraordinary tool. It gives you unprecedented ability to create optimal clinical experiences to really maximize your clients, your patients' chances of overcoming anxiety. So here's a quick review of some of the key points from the research on using VR for exposure, which is one of its strongest use cases, although it can be used in many ways. So it evokes an emotional and a physiological response, even though you know that you've just put on a headset. It's very high client acceptability. I have people calling me from all over the country asking, could they come see me because I offer VR. Patients are seeking VR. It's effective over a diverse, it's been used effectively around the world. It's used with older people, younger people. It's used with a variety of gender identities. I mean, client-patient diversity doesn't seem to be a limiting factor. And it's as efficacious as in vivo, and the results transfer to real life. So what did it look like when I started out? Well, when I started out, this was the VR equipment. It was so huge that it didn't even fit in my own office. The director of the department, the chief of the department, who was there part-time in our clinic and part-time in another, allowed me to take over a third of his office as the VR space. You'll see there was a separate monitor, a separate computer. Everything was wired. There was a 3-foot by 4-foot vibrating platform. And it cost $22,000 to treat 3 phobias. $22,000. So what is it now? How have things changed? Well, now, right? I mean, you could put the patient's phone in a cardboard. They don't get great. It's not great visual acuity. It's not real comfortable. But you can do VR for what, 15 bucks, right? So the world has changed. And what are the changes that it makes for your patients? It changes their lives. These are patient quotes because they've been able to do what they were afraid of in session with me. Now, there's effective treatment for anxiety without VR, but if you add VR, you turbocharge the effectiveness of what you're doing. And there are 3 secrets to doing effective virtual reality exposure therapy. One is prepare the patient. You identify their fears and you're able to counter them with facts and logic in a way that is convincing to them before you do exposure. You don't just throw them in and expect a miracle, right? Secondly, you teach them to expect anxiety. The amygdala has not yet changed. The neural pathways in the brain have not yet changed, right? So you prepare them to expect anxiety. And of course, the other thing to remember is that VR is a tool. It's a tool. It's not a standalone treatment, but it allows you to learn in a very engaging way management techniques to help tolerate anxiety. When you go into a virtual situation and confront your fears, the facts may come to the surface that were previously unarticulated. And it gives you a way to, rather than escaping or avoiding, to go, whoops, and confront the fears. So you can use it to teach stress management. You can use it to teach anxiety tolerance skills like diaphragmatic breathing. You can use it to identify fears, and then you can use it to help them face their fears in a way that feels physically and emotionally real and present. So they're doing in your office what you want them to do in real life, and you can make sure that what you're doing in the therapy works. If you want to learn more about using VR with anxiety, you could take a look at the webinar, the 6 CEU webinar. You can also take a look at the client guide, which helps prepare patients for VR exposure, for anxiety treatment, and the therapist guide that's going to be coming out later this year. And the link will actually get you the option to pre-order it at a discount. And if you have questions, I really invite you, please feel free to call or email me. I am so convinced of the way that VR improves the effectiveness and the power of empirically validated treatments for anxiety that I am happy to talk with you. So feel free to get in touch with me and share any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Elizabeth. I don't know if you knew this, but back in 2008, 2009, I was working with Virtually Better, the company that provided that equipment as part-time CEO. And we were so excited to have you using our equipment as an early adopter. And you're absolutely right. It's just amazing how for so much less expense and much more comfort we can provide, and much more exposure therapy content now to so much. And it's a really fantastic example of the power of VR to be used therapeutically to provide help in ways that otherwise would be very difficult to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'll be grilling you with some questions after we hear from the other speakers.
I'll look forward to it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, great introduction, and I love the comparison of what it looked like, what it is now. Next, we will get the introduction by Christian Angern. So Christian Angern, he's the founder of Sympatient, a young startup in Hamburg in Germany that is also providing a virtual reality solution for treatment of phobias, for example.
Yeah, hi everyone from Hamburg, Germany, where it's already night or evening. I look forward to sharing a bit our work in the field as well. First of all, thank you though, Elizabeth. I'm not a clinician myself, but hearing you talk about the impact and then seeing other people's data, our own trial data, it's just amazing to see what can happen for the patients if you actually implement any form of mixed reality in the medical field. And that's what we're all about. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if that works for you guys. Perfect. Thanks, Christoph. And we are focused, as Christoph introduced, on digital anxiety therapy with not just VR, but also apps and blended care concepts. We are 25 employees. We're already fully reimbursed by all statutory health insurances in Germany, meaning that any person there can get our care for free. Work very closely with clinical partners. And what's been at what's been our main target from day one is to develop clinically validated mixed reality or virtual reality intervention, which arrive at the point of care. And that point of care doesn't have to exist yet. It can be a new point of care in the patient's home, where digital therapeutics can now get, but always closely integrate with the clinicians such as you, Elizabeth. Because we strongly believe if a patient warrants an exposure therapy, as in the case of anxiety patients, there needs to be some sort of human contact as well. And we set out as a team of GPs, therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, economists, really got everyone together over the past couple of years to not just develop amazing technology, because Rizzo, Walter himself, and a lot of others have developed amazing technology and pushed the standard there. But now it is we set out to get it into the patient population. And what I'm going to tell you about our work will be very centered about care problems. And this is a very specific take that's focusing on the German situation. So this is the German healthcare system is very, very specific, highly regulated. So if there are any takeaways, always take it with a grain of salt. That I only know my market best, so it might be very different for the States or any other country. So in Germany or worldwide, we have an amazing standard of care already for anxiety patients, which centers on cognitive behavioral therapy, if available or needed, also pharmacotherapy, but also exposure, the confrontation to your fear eliciting scenarios or objects. And in Germany, less than 11% of the annually ill, around 5 million patients with agoraphobia, social phobias, or panic disorder, these are the disorders that we treat, receive the standard of care. And a lot of apps and digital therapeutics currently are only getting the so-called psychoeducation, the videos of therapists into the patient's home. And that's nice, that's awesome. We love that people are doing that, but we, from the get-go, when we were founded 3 years ago, said, no, we need to get the high tech into the patient's living room, and therefore developed Invirto. Invirto, you might guess the name, already comes from in vivo, real life confrontation. And then we're bringing that into virtual scenarios, focuses on panic disorder, agoraphobia with and without panic disorder, social phobia, and is a medical device fully certified in the European Union, that comprises of a cardboard-like VR, but more higher quality cardboard VR headset. Our app and VR and CBT software and headphones, because a lot of patients also don't have that available. You got to think there of all the socio-demographics that you want to cover. And really isn't just a standalone VR concept, but it is, as I said, a blended concept, which comprises also of the diagnosis and the accompanying contacts with a psychologist, psychotherapist, psychiatrist, whom we also train for free as well. And under the Digital Care Act, but also in additional care contracts with health insurances, we are fully reimbursed in Germany, and yeah, we're actually really beyond the research stage, and yeah, in care, which feels amazing, because that enables us to really solve this problem of an underserved patient population with digital therapeutics. The app itself focuses, has a lot of graphic elements. We're really nitpicky about creating an amazing patient experience. This is all German, since we're very much focused on Germany. We're a very focused little organization, but we care about a lot of things in the patient journey. There you see the little anxiety monsters sitting on everybody's shoulders. So we have a storytelling concept where you get to know your own little anxiety monster as a patient, which accompanies you through the therapy. It becomes your buddy. From a little naggy little buddy, it turns to your friend. As you get to know your anxiety, you learn to live with it. We all have some sort of anxieties in our lives, and we destigmatize that, help people get to grips with that. We have videos of therapists and a lot of exercises, and then ultimately the exposure scenarios, which can be done also in the patient's homes, which is very important to us because it enables an additional care setting where VR and exposure can be done when the patients are motivated and ready to do that. But that's always happening after control talks with a psychologist, with a therapist. Yeah, it's if you can see this, this is one of the scenarios. We can film these. They're guided. Probably can't hear that, but it's very loud in my headphones. It's guided by a voice of a therapist, and it really brings really high quality to the patient's homes. And that way, yeah, our goal is to bring high tech or make the high tech experience really low tech for the patients, so we can enable the standard of care in patients' homes, assist both therapists and the patients to receive an amazing care. Yeah, and later on, now I've taken up a lot of time here already. Later on, I'd be happy to answer any questions to budding entrepreneurs or students, technologists. We're experts in market access, really getting to the patients. Yeah, a very focused German mindset there. Happy to chat about that. Thanks for having me as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's super interesting that you already got the full insurance reimbursement. You sent out this headset, and the patient doesn't sit on a huge bill. This is perhaps also an interesting perspective from the other side of the ocean. And now we have Margaret Mantorao, who is the Director of Scientific and Strategic Partnerships at Penumbra. And she's also worked for many years in the digital healthcare space. And please, Marguerite, now the space is yours.
Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. Like Elizabeth, I'm also a clinician, spent many years practicing as a licensed clinical social worker in a range of settings, from inpatient to partial hospitalization program to private practice, with particular expertise in CBT and also mindfulness. And then branched out along the way. My mom developed dementia, and I just discovered a whole new world, and did a deep dive into the field of neurodegenerative diseases, and developed several programs, products to help fill some of the gaps in that space. And of course, if we use a person-centered care approach, there's a whole, it's looking at all the components of a person's experience, including the mental, cognitive, physical components, and also the care ecosystem, not just the patient or person themselves, but also the families and the world around them. And as part of those initiatives, got into digital health, first developing a therapeutic app using music to engage, to help care providers and caregivers engage persons with dementia. And then developed another program to help dementia care providers better care for persons with dementia using a mindfulness-based approach. And the third initiatives that I undertook in that space is a digital health startup to help better diagnose persons of dementia and provide personalized care at scale for those patients. Then was invited to participate in two other startups. First one, an IoT startup, so getting into devices and looking at how to best provide care at home for persons with dementia using sensors. And And then my most recent startup experience was with Pear Therapeutics, where I was asked to lead the discovery innovation program in prescription digital therapeutics for Pear, where I had the opportunity to really have a very broad view and experience of the whole therapeutic landscape, including mental health, heavy into CBT, mindfulness, and looking at various delivery vehicles, including VR. And then just recently made the transition to a much bigger company, Penumbra, and I'm only 3 weeks in the job, and really so thrilled to be joining a group of such talented people there, developing exciting new VR technologies across the spectrum of different therapeutic areas. I'm especially excited to work in the VR space because I think it fills in a huge gap in the field of digital therapeutics, which is the engagement gap. And I think Elizabeth talked about, the acceptability, the exceptional acceptability of a VR delivery for patients. And, when you have patients just deal with and I think Christian, you also talked about that, just a CBT app, it's really hard to get patients to first initially engage, but more importantly, sustain the engagement with that therapeutic, because it requires so much effort from the patient or the person. And we know that these patients, and I'm thinking, broad range of patients, from patients with only mental health diagnosis to patients who may have severe chronic conditions and comorbid mental diagnosis. So those patients may have, already dealing with heavy burden, mental burden, cognitive burden, physical burden, which means they don't have much bandwidth to do the type of mental work that's required, or cognitive work or physical work that's required for them to get better. And that's where VR is so exceptional, because it reduces the sense of the perceived effort from patients, and help them overcome that barrier so that they can get the treatment that they need. So I think it's the sky is the limit in terms of the potential applications of VR, specifically for mental health applications, but also taking into account the likely mental health comorbidities that may be present when we apply VR treatments for other applications, for instance, neuro rehab, with a heavy focus on motor and cognitive rehab. So keeping in mind that that person may also be dealing with depression or anxiety. So how does that inform how we design the user experience for those patients, so that they are more likely to go with the treatment and complete the treatment.
Thank you very much, Marguerite. Then I also just saw that actually, Sarah, you made it. Can you spotlight Sarah, please? Steffi. And Sarah, if you can give a very quick introduction, please, about your work at Helium. And then we'll try to relatively quickly switch to the panel discussion. We are a bit, thank you very much.
Apologize for my tardiness. I must have had a time zone misconsideration, so apologize for joining late.
Oh, thank you.
Helium essentially is a virtual and augmented reality product that's powered by your brain patterns and your heart rate via consumer wearables that you already have in your home. So these are just nature-based experiences that are triggered by EEG. And it's a self-awareness tool and a reminder that our thoughts have power to control things, not only in the virtual world, but in the real world as well. Not used in clinical environments, mostly in the wellness sector, with healthcare workers for compassion fatigue, with the US Air Force, with athletes, as well as worker athletes. It's great to be here. Apologize that I'm got the time mixed up. Look forward to learning and hearing from the group.
You're just in time, because the introduction's just wrapping up, so perfect. Thank you very much. Then Walter, please.
But I have to say,
It's
I
all
have
yours.
to compliment Sarah because she has I've seen her in action doing something that I thought was really remarkable and important for our field. Um, Just before we had the shelter-in-place order for the pandemic, there was a conference of the International Virtual Reality Health Association in Nashville. And it was a 2-day conference. The evening of the first night, a tornado came through very close to the conference center hotels and to Vanderbilt University where we were having the conference. The next morning, Sarah sprang into action and rounded up a number of the VR headsets that were there for demonstrations, and went out with to the Red Cross shelters to help the people and the workers who were helping the people who had just gone through a disaster. And Sarah, I was always so impressed both with your rapid response to an emergency and effective use of VR tools, and also the way we were able to, on the spot, help people using VR technology. So once again, I have to compliment you on your action that day.
Pleasure to be here. I lost my home in a tornado years ago, so happy to provide the relief, not only with our products, but we had a bunch of them there. So it's always great to collaborate with people doing similar work. Thank you.
Well, and that's a very important point. I think that in the field of applying VR technology to behavioral healthcare and also to medicine in general, I don't really see competitors. I see collaborators, both academic, early stage companies, later stage companies, trying to move the opportunity forward. So it's wonderful to be part of a group that is striving together to improve the efficiency of medicine. Okay, well, Christoph, are we ready to move into the panel discussion part of the session?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, let me start by giving a little bit of an overall view from my perspective of where things are, both in terms of the evolution of technology as applied in VR for behavioral healthcare, and also where we might be going in the near future. And then I'm going to ask some very pointed questions to some of our panelists today. And I wish we had the opportunity to have a free-ranging discussion with all the people who are out listening, but hopefully we can do that offline by some questions being posed through email and other mechanisms. I think we're really at an inflection point in our healthcare system for adopting technology to help in behavioral healthcare. It's been an evolution for a long time. Even just having a computer in the room, if you're a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a social worker, was viewed as a barrier between you and your patient or your client. But now I think we're realizing the power of the technology, in particular VR and AR technology, to be able to evoke a cognitive response and to be able to measure and understand what therapeutic paradigms work, to be able to use machine learning to understand and to collect data from biosensors and integrate that. We're really at a point where new measurement technology will allow us to come up with better protocols and apply precision medicine to the field of psychiatry, psychology, and behavioral healthcare at large. I think we're also finding we now have some very powerful tools to evoke a mood, evoke a cognitive response. If we can do that, then we can teach people the skills to help manage them. And that's really what it's all about. I do think there's a lot of work to be done, both demonstrating to our colleagues in the insurance and reimbursement arena the value of both reducing costs and extending care to underserved populations. But we're really entering an era where the integration of powerful technologies like VR and AR to evoke a cognitive response, have a narrative behind the experience, and to promote adherence in that way. And also to, again, better objective assessment. So glad to have this panel together. And I'll start perhaps by asking, I guess, let me start with you, Elizabeth. How do you feel about doing teletherapy for exposure therapy? I think for some indications, it may not be a big deal. You may not worry about evoking, perhaps triggering an uncomfortable state in your clients when you're not in the room. But in other cases, you may worry if it's something where it's extreme trauma. I'm not a clinician, so I don't know what the guardrails are for that issue, but I'm curious how you feel about that.
Well, it's interesting with COVID, obviously, everyone basically transitioned to teletherapy. And that may have impeded the adoption of VR because not all companies have VR products that can be used with teletherapy. And you're right, you're not there present in the room. So if you're working with someone who has been through extreme trauma, if you're working with someone who dissociates, if you're working with someone who becomes suicidal under emotional pressure, adding VR to address trauma and to bring up the trauma response is probably not something I would do. On the other hand, using VR to help ground, to help self-soothe, to help calm and distract could be even more important because you're not physically present with the power of your physical presence. But I've definitely used VR for exposure with phobias successfully. And as a matter of fact, I had a flurry of frantic requests for people to help get over needle phobia so they could get vaccinated. And I'm thrilled to say that it's been very successful.
Fantastic. Christian, I guess a related question for you would be, how do your patients get access to your therapeutics? Do they go through a clinician, or is there a mechanism for them to self-diagnose and self-treat?
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is a really important one that we've asked ourselves from the get-go. If your goal is to provide access to high-quality VR healthcare or general digital therapeutics, you will inevitably ask that question. What would be amazing from my point of view, simply from a technology point of view and access point of view, is if we had fully well working digital diagnostics. But if you do look at the research on the tools available currently, what appears to fare best for patients is a mix of a digital diagnostic combined with a clinician. I think this makes sense intuitively because the psyche can be so different for every person, and a digital tool might not be able to pick up on some cues. So right now we're strongly focused on always having a person present, but obviously most clinical questionnaires that we know in practice, I'm not a clinician myself, but I know what our therapists and clinicians use, and it is standardized questionnaires. So taking some of these digitally, that's definitely where things will be heading, but we really focus on access through licensed clinicians that are experts, can diagnose comorbidities. If we think of anxieties, 50 to 60% of these patients have a comorbid depression, and not picking that up could we just don't think that should be the case. So always somebody with you.
Fantastic perspective. Sarah, you're working using VR and AR with neurofeedback. What differences are there used to modulate the user's mood using VR as an evocative environment compared to some other ways of doing that through, for example, perhaps listening to music or watching a peaceful nature sound on a screen as opposed to fully immersed?
Yeah, so what we're finding in the research, not only in our research, but in other research, is that it's on a spectrum. And the more immersive media that you add, the more therapeutic it is. And it's on a spectrum. And we have this spelled out on the science page of our site, but audio absolutely has the ability, audio only has the ability to shift brain patterns. audio with augmented reality has the ability to add brain patterns. But when you add that feedback and add that ability for the user to learn to self-regulate their brain and also see their own brain patterns displayed in near real time, that adds an element of engagement that increases the likelihood that the user wants to go back into it because they know, am I doing it right? And so you have audio, you have AR with feedback, then you have VR, and then you have VR with feedback on that spectrum. And that's not to say that you can't get value from just audio only, but that immersiveness, as that goes up, as the feedback goes up, you are seeing a boost in engagement rates, and at least from our research, a more quicker shift in those EEG brain patterns.
Well, and one of the very valuable aspects of using VR and AR technology is that we can create more cognitive engagement, but we can also build a narrative around the experience that gives people more agency in their own therapeutic process. And healthcare is not easy, and it's hard to address your own fears in particular. But if we can design ways that people come back and continue to work on those things that might be uncomfortable, and I think the work that you've done has been exemplary in that arena. One question that comes to mind is I mentioned at the very beginning some of the work that the Virtual Human Interaction Lab had been doing to look at the effects of technology on society, and one of our publications indicates how it's possible to identify users and obtain personal identifiable user information based on sensor recordings while they're in a virtual environment. That brings up the issue of protecting patient privacy. How does Helium address that?
Yeah, address it in a variety of ways and a number of layers. So when we first started out creating our product, we weren't capturing any biometric data because we didn't feel like we were equipped with those data privacy protections. And we spent years developing incident response protocols, data protection officer, deputy data protection officer. And ultimately what we've built is a HIPAA compliant, a GDPR ready, NIST aligned, ISO certified backend. Obviously, when you're dealing with EEG brain patterns, that's a sensitive data set. And we have to ensure that our users' data is safe, even though it's not being used as a diagnostic tool. Helium is a self-awareness tool. It's not meant to be a replacement for any kind of psychotropic medication or professional counseling. But as a training tool, that is important data for the users to have access to. So we spent a great deal of time in ensuring that we did have those data protections in place. And as we all know that it's a moving target, whether it's Illinois, California, biometric privacy laws, GDPR, or what we're seeing with the shift in some of Apple's privacy policies. When we were first forming the company, had never realized how many resources needed to be dedicated to that. But obviously we do that and we continue to do that. And there are some great groups out there that are helping companies in this space try to navigate that complicated landscape when you're working with limited resources. But it's a great question. I think that study was very eye-opening for a lot of us. And when we first read through it, we thought, well, we think we're okay because we're not 6 DOF. We were just 3 DOF at the time, and DOF meaning degrees of freedom. So we're not, tracking the users moving around the room. But what they correctly pointed out in that article was even 3 DOF had the ability, I think it was 15%, and maybe somebody will put a link to that article. If not, after I get done talking, I'll put it in so you all can read it yourselves. But even 3 DOF has the ability with some machine learning programs to identify the height of the user via their head pose or via their motion tracking. With Helium, we don't save any of that tracking or motion data, so there's not that ability. But studies like that bring up very important conversations about how, when you are creating XR products, augmented or virtual reality products, ensuring that those users don't have the ability to identify, we're not selling their data, and that their data is properly protected behind some of those platforms. And I'll pull up that study, or maybe he put it in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Marguerite, I'm curious, you've been involved in developing digital health applications at the full spectrum of types of companies. You've been an entrepreneur yourself, you've been a clinician, you've worked with Series B and Series C funded stage companies like therapeutics, and now you're with a larger medical device company. You've also had the opportunity to try different types of digital health technologies to address the problems that you've been focused on. What are your thoughts as you move into this new role at Penumbra of the different possible clinical uses of VR, and what are you most excited about? I know that's a hard question because you're probably excited about several things, but maybe give our audience a few reasons you are particularly excited about working with VR and AR technology.
Yeah, and there's quite a few. I think besides the direct mental health applications, I think so many therapeutic areas. I think thinking about the fact that most of the expenditures in healthcare are related to severe chronic conditions. So how do we serve those different populations, keeping in mind, as I said earlier, the heavy burden that they face, including the mental burden, and tapping into the power of VR as a tool and the possibility of mixing and matching different activities related to all those different aspects of the person's challenges. So not just applications to deal with, motor rehab, but also applications for cognitive training, applications for dealing with anxiety, so activities, and then chronic pain, which is another huge component of the healthcare experience. So helping with distraction therapy. And we know that chronic pain VR is uniquely suited as a opioid avoidance treatment for chronic pain. And then just really addressing all these layers of, depression, anxiety, fatigue, pain, and then specific treatment for specific diagnosis. I think getting back to your point earlier, Walter, about precision medicine, I think if you build a VR platform, which is what I'm excited, one of the reasons I joined Penumbra is this, the vision and what's happening in terms of building a VR platform where you can treat the whole person. So going beyond, let's say, just anxiety and exposure therapy, but how can we treat, address the whole person, which is rarely just one diagnosis, and also thinking about the evolution of the health conditions of these patients that's constantly changing, so needing to adjust the treatment. The other aspect that came to my attention last week is the opportunity for cross-function collaborations. Let's say for a speech therapist, a physical therapist, occupational therapist, a neuropsychologist, mental health providers to collaborate using the same VR platform and technology to address all these aspects of a person's care needs and collaborate, including the assessment part, right? So looking at the baseline along these different dimensions and then how the person is doing along, the mental, cognitive, and physical, health outcomes.
I do have a question, if I can jump in to Elizabeth right now, because if I'm looking at the screens here right now, I see like we have Walter, you have the virtual human interaction lab behind you, we have the company, so always lots of developers behind us who can create the content. So I want to ask Elizabeth. Elizabeth, if you are working with your patients and you have a patient with phobia A or phobia B, you probably always need different content for different patients. How do you create the content? And how is it regulated? Is it very strongly regulated in your case?
It's not strongly regulated. I primarily go to the companies that have devoted themselves to creating VR content specifically for use in psychotherapy. So that would be companies like, I'm going to try and give them in alphabetical order, Behavior, which has taken over Limbix, Invertuo out of Canada, Psyos out of Barcelona, I'm sorry, C2 Care, I missed them alphabetically, out of France, and Virtually Better out of Georgia. So primarily I'm going to go to those companies that this is their space. This is what they do, is create VR environments specifically and with the variables tailored for psychotherapy use. Beyond that, you might be able to use Google Street View, say, to take someone back to the location of a trauma, or to put someone in situations in public, say, to treat panic disorder or agoraphobia or specific phobias. There's some VR content on YouTube, but that's not created to be therapeutic. In fact, usually it's created to evoke an intense emotion, which is really not what you're generally going for. There are VR cameras, but then you get the issue of shooting, editing, so that at this point, I don't create my own content, although I think that might be a holy grail, to create totally individualized content for your patient. On the other hand, between reality and the holy grail, there's this vast highway of really effective, really helpful, good enough.
So this is a good point. You said that yours is not strongly regulated, and also I think your patients, they pay out of pocket mainly. So I wonder, Christian, is this for you very different now, because it's yours all, I guess, strongly regulated and insurance reimbursed? What if you want to change content? You cut off 5 minutes of a video, or you want to add 5 minutes of a different video, or how does that work for you?
It's an interesting question where I believe a strong regulation for mixed reality has yet to be implemented. From my point of view, maybe I'll share that first. If you add or improve the clinical effects, I think, and if you can prove that, the burden to you as a medical device manufacturer, which we technically are, it should be relatively low. Now, it begs the interesting question, is the thing that you're changing part of a medical device? Is this regulated as such, or maybe that's different, I don't know for the US, but in Germany, if you apply VR in a medical setting, it automatically has the effect, or it alleviates or triggers symptoms. It's part of the therapy, and therefore by German medical device law becomes a medical device. I'm not sure how the FDA regulates VR technology in the United States. So it might be very different there, but in Germany, as soon as you employ it as such, it becomes a medical device. You have to go through a very rigorous process, and the legislation has just very recently changed in the whole of Europe to the medical device regulation, where from now on, any change significant change, it's actually called that's the term. And if you really change something and there is no legislation, so I cannot answer the question finally, you'll have to check carefully. Does this have a significant impact on the use case of the medical device? And then you might need to actually provide clinical data that this is a safe, inherently safe change. So super interesting question, which for which we still lack the legislation, and look forward to that being developed as we go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I just actually see in the chat, there are many questions about the privacy. And there was recently this very important paper by the Virtual Human Interaction Lab that you can pretty clearly identify a person just from their behavior in VR and from the sensor data. So Walter, I'll move over, like I'll give it back to you again, but it would be really interesting to also hear your comments about that or lead discussion. How do we tackle this issue?
Well, it is a big issue, and one of my concerns is that it's not just the therapeutic development arena that needs to pay attention to this. As we come up with better ways of looking at behavior in a virtual environment, gaze direction, facial expressions, voice tone, as our colleagues in the academic research arena pioneer new ways of doing cognitive assessments, using sensor technology and behavior in these environments, as those get pushed out and extended by the development community, turning them into clinical products, there'll be groups out there that will take those learnings and they'll apply it to virtual online games, for example, where it's not a clinical context, but because we know how to take this information about gaze direction, facial expression, movement, behavior, and score, that now an employer might be able to purchase a report on someone of what their propensity is for depression or for suicidality, or what their level of anxiety is, or how well do they play with others. Once we have a way to use those assessments clinically, which is so important for us to do the best clinical care, there will be ways for them to be used for purposes that will be more adverse. So it's an issue. I'm not sure at all how to address it. There are organizations that are, working to help come up with some standards for this. XRSI is one group. Their URL is in the chat window here, sent by Sarah. But I think it's a very, very big issue. And again, with any emerging technology, there's going to be amazing things we can do with it that help move our society forward, and potential down as soon as possible. I think that the clinical community and the product development arena needs to take action here, because otherwise it can get out of control. I think the other thing that we need to be careful about is not, as we build out a library of evocative experiences, as you were asking Christoph of Elizabeth about the need for that, we need to be careful that we don't build into our content libraries biases. If we're going to have content that's used to do a clinical appraisal and therapeutic intervention, it needs to be culturally diverse, age appropriate, and not have biases built into it, so that we're excluding or tempering our judgment based on the biases of the people who are aggregating and designing these experiences. So I think these are solvable problems, but in the rush to provide enhanced clinical products, we need to make sure that we also are careful to do it correctly.
Thank you very much. So just a quick disclaimer, because it's 10, we'll extend, because the discussion is going very well, as we are so many questions still to ask us in the chat. We'll extend the time in Zoom by 10 minutes, and we'll move together down for some private one-to-one a bit later. I have one question to Sarah actually right now, because you can probably, like with VR, you can measure, for example, the retention rates of your patients once they're in the device itself. There were some questions in the chat about issues such as nausea for patients, and how do you ensure, for example, to elderly patients that they don't get nauseous when they put on the device. Do you have any experience with that, how to minimize that, and also what the retention rates are once they try it out for the first time?
Yeah, so as far as nausea, obviously anyone who's prone to motion sickness or epilepsy is not a good candidate for virtual reality. And our products are not used in clinical environments, so I wouldn't be able to speak about elderly patients per se. However, I can talk about a group of aging veterans who use Healium to virtually visit their memorials. And these are instances where you don't just give a headset to an older individual and expect them, to be able to use it, or also properly screen whether or not they should even have it in their hands. So we work with the caregivers, with the family members, to equip them with tool sets, not only for screening whether or not they're a good candidate physically and emotionally as well. Perhaps they're not even a good candidate that should be seeing their memorials based on some of their past experiences, but also hygienically, ensuring that when they give them a headset, not only is it not making them sick, but it's not giving them, pink eye. And so there are great solutions out there like CleanBox, which is one of them. And I can put that in the chat, which is essentially a box that you put the headset in, you press a button, and it kills SARS, COVID, and a number of other bacteria. But it's important to note that not only for in those clinical environments, but those hygiene, safety, nausea protocols, even in the wellness sector, in the homes, in some of the veterans' homes where our products are used.
Thank you very much. So that's a very good point. Also, Marguerite, you mentioned previously that you were working already previously in a wide variety of applications. So you were working in depression, in dementia. I believe you also mentioned grief. Mm-hmm. So if we think about how we can use VR for all this wide variety of use cases, for example, with grief, one thing that comes to my mind is right now is an extreme case where in South Korea, there was this case that perhaps many people in the audience have seen, where a mother who lost her child was recreating a virtual avatar of a child and met this avatar in a virtual environment. Is this an appropriate way to, an ideal way to target grief with virtual reality, or is there something, what do you think might be more appropriate for different use cases?
Yeah, I think grief is a very under-researched field that is lots of potential, I think, for VR. One area in particular that comes to my mind is the area of ambiguous loss that's associated with progressive diseases, such as neurodegenerative diseases, and also severe chronic condition where the person keeps experiencing new losses that may not be visible to the world, but have very serious emotional, cognitive, and overall functioning consequences. So the ability to have a live experience and memorialization of these personal losses, I think is going to be tremendously important, because, as we know, unacknowledged grief is another source of energy depletion for a person, emotional energy that can be another layer to depression and anxiety. I just think there's the ability to grieve the old self. It could be an avatar, showing the old self and then welcoming the new self. These are some ideas that I think are worth exploring.
Actually, so in this space, I would just want to go to Walter, because didn't you previously talk about a study where people saw their older self in VR?
Well, one of the techniques that's been pioneered at the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab is to create an avatar of your future self. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, it can be used to close the feedback loop for many issues in behavioral health care. All too often, we need to change our behaviors, whether it be drinking too much alcohol, not getting enough exercise, eating too much of a certain type of food, or whatever. And we don't see the effect of our hard work. And so it's hard to keep going. We don't have that reward feedback loop. But if we connect with the avatar of our future self, and there's a process to go through to do that with having it look like you, but also have it reflect your movements, then it's been shown that this can be used to influence all aspects of behavior, be it saving for retirement to getting more exercise. And I think overcoming grief might be another good example of the use of that. The other thing I think we haven't talked about yet, because we've been talking pretty much about clinicians working with patients, either with assessments or interventions. There's also the power of connecting people to each other. And for post-discharge follow-up, for support, for so many things. And many people are motivated, if we're using the analogies that our compatriots in the gaming arena, they often talk about different reward systems. And for many people, the reward of connecting with other people is so important to keep adhering to a process. And virtual environments heretofore have often been very lonely, that it's one individual interacting with an experience or having an experience, but very rarely do we have other people as part of that because of the limitations of the technology. Often avatars of other people in a virtual environment look very robotic. They don't have the nonverbal communication of facial expressions and body language. But that's changing, and we're getting much better with our shared multi-user virtual environments, which I think will allow for some powerful things, telemedicine, but also for group support. And I had the pleasure of speaking at Lars's conference, Shift Medical, last year, a wonderful conference, and he held it in a virtual environment where all the speakers showed up as avatars. And so we're getting better at our virtual world technology. And I think that will add a new layer of capability to all the things we've been talking about here in behavioral medicine, including role playing. We haven't talked about that, but one thing a clinician can do is help someone learn, practice maybe a drug refusal skill and how to resist peer pressure, or someone on the autism spectrum learning social skills. We can, as we get better at our multi-user virtual environments, we build in more of the nonverbal communication, which is currently missing. I think we'll be able to open up some other clinical pathways.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so it was a wonderful discussion, and there are still a ton of questions that would be great to address. Now we will also have the possibility to address them because we can now move to GatherTown. So Steffi, it would be great if you put the link in the chat. And for everybody who hasn't used GatherTown before, wait, I'll just quickly show a slide. So if you click on the link and you land in GatherTown, one thing for your name, ideally use your first and last name so that people know who you are. Once you are in GatherTown, try to open with the Google Chrome. I use Firefox, but so that also works. But apparently I heard Safari doesn't work. And open in your browser and allow microphone and camera access right away when you're asked. Please leave Zoom once you enter GatherTown, so we don't have any feedback. And in GatherTown, it's pretty self-explaining. You can move around with the arrows. You can move directly to the people, to the panelists, and ask questions. Then let's move over. There should be the link now in the chat. One last thing for all the Stanford people out there. We have the new community mixed reality lab here at the Butzai Neuroscience Institute. If you're interested to use that space, I'll say that every time, please shoot me an email. And then now, thank you so much to all the panelists and to Walter with the Virtual Human Interaction Lab, and hope to see many of you on the other side.